As I think about bull selection, it all really starts with a breeding objective. And a breeding objective isn't something, in my opinion, that you put together a night before the sale when you're headed out to try to buy bulls the next day. A breeding objective is something really a lot more core to your enterprise. It identifies what I call economically relevant traits. Those are the traits that are directly tied to a source of cost or directly tied to a source of revenue. And it identifies those by creating a detailed description of what the operational goals are. Things like how replacements are going to be procured. Are those going to be generated on ranch? If so, are they generated from a separate herd? Or are they going to be purchased from outside? How and when will terminal animals be sold? Are they going to be sold at weaning, or are you going to retain ownership through the finishing phase? And then it also identifies any management or environmental constraints, because at the end of the day, those really manifest into economic considerations. So if labor's limited, that changes the relative importance of some traits, or if feed availability is limited, that changes emphasis on certain traits. So a bit more about economically relevant traits. I mentioned that they're directly associated with a cost or return. That's what we call an economically relevant trait. And anything other than that is what we call an indicator trait. An indicator trait can be genetically correlated to an ERT, but itself does not directly relate to a cost or source of revenue. So I think a really good example is birth weight or calving ease. Of course, calving ease is the economically relevant trait because it's directly related to a source of potential cost. Birth weight is simply an indicator of it, all right? Despite the fact that birth weight is probably one of the primary selection criterion of a lot of commercial bull buyers. Weaning weight or yearling weight? Well, this one, the answer is it depends. Is your market endpoint at weaning, or do you background cattle and maybe sell yearlings, right? So it depends in that case on when you plan on marketing animals. So the ERT can be a bit conditioned on the particular enterprise. So after a breeding objective is formed, and I'd say that breeding objectives shouldn't change year to year. I mean, there may be little tweaks here and there as you make improvements in a particular trait, but overall, a breeding objective should stay relatively static. Breed selection should be based on your breeding objective. So matching breeds based on their strengths to what your goals are. And for a commercial cattle producer, it should contemplate more than one breed to take advantage of both heterosis and breed complementarity. This is a table that admittedly is about a year old, that's adapted from an annual report from the Meat Animal Research Center in Clay Center, Nebraska. They, of course, have a very long-standing project called the Germplasm Evaluation Project. And through that, they identify actually breed of sire differences for a number of growth and carcass traits, which I have here. What I've done is essentially made those full breed differences. In this table, everything is contrasted to Angus. And what you'll see is how breeds compare, and you can think of this as the average in example Angus animal, how it compares to the average in example Charolais animal. And it can give producers some windage, if you will, on how breeds on average compare for birth weight, weaning weight, yearling weight, milk, which is maternal weaning weight, marbling, ribeye area, fat thickness, and carcass weight. You'll see some breeds here, a couple of American breeds have missing values for some of the carcass traits. That's simply because those breeds don't have EPD for those traits. And as a consequence, it wasn't possible or isn't possible then to adjust these breed differences to an average, right? So that's why there's missing values. something that's important for a lot of producers, or should be, that's not in that table, is mature cow weight. These are actually research results using U.S. mark data that shows breed differences for mature cow weight for some of the more popular or heavily used breeds in the U.S. And these are all, again, contrasted to Angus. And what you'll see, I think unsurprisingly, is that a lot of our British-based breeds are heavier at maturity compared to some of our continental-based breeds. And that's a fairly substantial shift compared to, let's say, 20 to 30 years ago, where British breeds, and British being Hereford, Angus, Red Angus, 20 or 30 years ago, those breeds would have been lighter at maturity. And so certainly there's been selection pressure to increase earlier growth, and that's manifested in larger mature weights. The point of showing breed differences isn't to pat one breed on the back or to shame another breed. It's to say that as producers choose which breeds fit into their breeding program, they should do it understanding what current breed differences actually are, and not maybe historically the way we think of the rank. You'll notice, and although I went through the slides relatively quickly, there are some antagonisms. If I'm selecting for early growth, like increased weaning weight or increased post-weaning gain, there's a tendency for some of those breeds to also be larger at maturity, and I don't think that's surprising. So the question can be, for a commercial producer, how do you begin to break those antagonisms? And one way to do it is simply not to ask one breed to do it all. And this is an example of what we call a 3-breed terminal crossbreeding system, whereby crossbred females, in this example, they're F1 females, first generation cross, are mated to a terminal breed of bull, so a completely different breed of bull, to produce all terminal offspring. Then they'd be half breed A and a quarter of each breed A and B. Half breed, I don't know what I said, half breed C, quarter of breeds A and B. And all those would go to market. So the replacement females are either purchased or they're produced from a separate enterprise on ranch. A benefit of this system, again, is you actually take advantage of maternal heterosis in the females, full maternal heterosis, full individual heterosis in the market-bound offspring, and you just need the females to be bred with maternal traits in mind, and then utilize the terminal breed of bull to bring added growth and carcass yield. So that system then helps really break some of the antagonisms that might exist. The benefits of such a system are heavier calves and more product from smaller cows, because you can either produce or source females that are bred to be smaller at maturity and use a terminal bull. And that could actually reduce the total feed intake requirements of the cow herd, because they should be smaller. I put on here less calving difficulty, and that presumes that if you purchase females, you're not purchasing replacement heifers. They're actually older females, perhaps females that are 3 years of age or older. And so the benefit then is you should have reduced dystocia and actually not have some of the breedback problems you might have with younger females. Increased uniformity, because there's commonality in breeding objectives. You have a lot more producers that aren't trying to do everything. They're just terminal. And so I think there's benefits to that. So part of this is tying back to a breeding objective, choosing what you really want to do and what you want to do well. So after breeds are selected, it becomes individual selection. So that's the actual bull, the individual animal or group of bulls. And I'd encourage people to think about this decision as a capital investment in genetics. And with that in mind, selection should be placed on the genetic value of an animal as a potential parent. So regardless, and I know this is a hard thing for whatever reason in beef cattle, but it really does not matter what the bull looks like, What matters is what his genetic potential is, right? And that's really important to understand. If the bull is docile enough, right, to fit your management criteria, and he is sound enough to actually be able to go out and travel and breed cows, and he passed a breeding soundness exam, then all other emphasis should be on his genetic merit. And with that in mind, it should be his genetic merit that relates to traits that actually advance the breeding objective, and as a consequence, increase net profit, right? So this is a business decision, and producers need to think about it that way. So some common misconceptions. I hear a lot that you really can't genetically change female fertility because it's lowly heritable. Indeed, female fertility, if we think about heifer pregnancy or staying cow fertility, stayability, the latter two are really proxies for reproductive longevity. Those traits are lowly heritable. They're somewhere between 10 and 20% heritable, but that doesn't mean we can't change them genetically. It just means that it takes longer to do so. So how do you reconcile other information? In a bull sale catalog, there will be a lot of data. Some of it is useful information. Okay, EPDs, economic selection indices, those are useful information. A bull's phenotype, what he actually weighed at birth, how much he actually weighed at weaning, occurs through the cumulative effect of a lot of factors, right? How old was his dam? That impacts his birth weight, and that impacts his weaning weight. What breed is he? Is he a crossbred bull, right? He may take advantage of heterosis if he himself is a crossbred. How much are we actually feeding them? How much did we feed the cows? How much are we feeding the bulls? Are we creep feeding them, right? All those things impact the bull's actual phenotype, but the only thing he passes on is his genetics. Genomics, right? For the past decade or better, that information has been included directly into the EPD. So if you want to take advantage of genomics, you just simply use the EPD. And I know there are some breed organizations that actually, in some form or fashion, right, on a website may be available to members of that organization, publish a percentile rank based off of genomics only. And I discourage producers from using that. Utilize the EPD. Difficult births should not result from calving ease bulls. On average, this is correct. However, there is variation due to Mendelian sampling. So every time a bull is mated, he passes on a random half of his alleles to the next generation. And through that sampling event, you can imagine a case where even a really good bull genetically passed on a bad sample, right? Passed on all his bad alleles or all his bad genes to that particular calf, which created a dystocia event, right? So these EPDs are meant to compare individuals based on what we expect the average of their offspring to be. That's an important concept. The other thing to keep in mind here is, right, that the cow plays a role in the genetics of the calf and their environmental influences on the calf's actual phenotype. So a bit more here, calving ease direct, as I mentioned, is the economically relevant trait and is related to the level of assistance needed during a calving event. People that select a decreased birth weight, it's just simply an attempt to reduce calving problems, and birth weight, as we discussed, is not the ERT. And in fact, the genetic correlation between calving ease and birth weight is somewhere in the -0.6 to -0.8 range, meaning that birth weight explains somewhere between 36 and 64% of the genetic differences for calving ease. So it's a very useful indicator, but it doesn't tell us the whole story. And actually, in the calculation of calving ease EPDs, birth weight is actually included in that analysis. So if you're wanting to select to decrease calving problems, use calving ease EPD. Don't use birth weight EPD, and for heaven's sake, don't use the actual birth weight of the animal. You're likely to make mistakes if you do that. What is milk? Well, milk is a misnomer, right? We don't milk beef cattle if we can help it. It's actually maternal weaning weight, right? So it's in pounds of weaning weight of calf due to maternal genetics. Several traits actually have a maternal genetic component. Birth weight actually does, but we don't publish a birth weight maternal EPD. Calving ease does, and we do publish a calving ease maternal EPD. It's actually total maternal calving ease. Sometimes I've heard milk called unexplained growth. That's not true. We've explained it, and we've attributed it to the dam's maternal genetics. So you can think about it as the proportion of weaning weight, variability that can be attributed to the female's maternal genetics, which we really attribute to her lactation potential. Independent culling levels, I wanted to mention this because in my experience, a lot of bull buyers do this. They set kind of ad hoc thresholds for several traits and require a bull to meet all of those thresholds before he's a candidate to purchase. The problem with this method is that what happens if a bull misses one threshold by just a little bit, but exceeds all others? Should you really dismiss him? Well, that's related to the second problem, is each trait equally important? The answer to the second question is no, they're not. And so that leads to the first problem is, well, it kind of depends on what threshold the bull missed. So independent culling levels are inherently flawed because they don't take into account that traits impact profit in different ways, and they don't allow for superiority in one trait to begin to offset inferiority in other, perhaps less important traits. So the best way to select for multiple traits at the same time, because multiple traits impact profit, is to use what we call economic selection indexes. I have a fairly complete, although I wouldn't say it's exhaustive list here of indexes available in the U.S. beef cattle industry, and I've delineated them as either terminal or general purpose. And by general purpose, I mean that some replacement females are going to be sold, steer calves are marketed, and coal heifers are marketed. And I've indicated which breed publishes which index. I'm not going to go through all these in detail, but if there are questions about specific indexes, I'd be happy to answer them at the end. I'll use an example, though. Probably still, and certainly in the past couple years, one of, if not the most popular index was Angus's dollar beef, that's dollar B, which is an index that makes the assumption that all calves born, heifers and bull calves that become steers, are fed out in a feedlot, and so it's a retained ownership situation, and they're marketed towards a CAB-based grid. So obviously it's going to emphasize post-weaning growth and carcass merit. It doesn't assume that heifers are being kept back. So as a consequence, it doesn't give any weighting to things like heifer pregnancy or mature cow weight, etc. So the important thing here is to use an index that best matches your breeding objective, all right? Because if you keep back heifers and you select on a terminal index, there's going to be a tendency that not only will you ignore fertility, you'll increase mature size over time. An example of how indexes can work, this is a bit of a dated, but a red Angus example here. We have two bulls, and we have their index values of a 134 and a 110. And if we make the assumption that the bull I buy is going to be bred to 30 cows a year, and I'm going to keep the bull for 4 years, that's 120 exposures over his lifetime in my herd. So if I multiply the number of exposures by the difference in their index values, what I wind up with is an estimate of the net profit difference that bull A has to my operation compared to bull B, right? Because the difference in their index values tells me the difference in net profit per exposure. So I just multiplied it then by the number of exposures. This can tell me that, you know, if bull A sells for $1,500 more than bull B, bull A was the right buy. But if bull A sells for $10,000 more than bull B, I was probably better off with bull B, okay? Going back to the fact that this is an investment, and you need to expect that investment to create a return. So this is all about making decisions. Bull purchasing decisions are unique to each herd, right? So what's good for me may not be the best for you. Maybe I need to consider calving ease more closely because I breed more heifers than you do, or I don't have as much labor as you do. In low feed input environments, forage availability may be a concern. And so I may need to put extra emphasis on decreasing mature size or lowering milk. And maybe I sell calves at weaning and you retain ownership through the feedlot, which changes what our endpoint and consequently what some of our economically relevant traits are. And given all that, as I've mentioned several times, it's an investment. And so best becomes a relative concept. A less desirable bull may be the preferred choice if his sale price discount is larger than the differential in value between the two bulls. And value is based on their genetic potential as it relates to your breeding objective. And that's kind of what I tried to show through that index example, right? So with those things in mind, I just want to briefly mention a project that I and colleagues at the U.S. Meat Animal Research.
Can I interrupt with a question there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I picked this second bull because of the differential you're talking about, okay?
Yeah.
But now, 4 years down the road, I pick the next bull. I'm already 4 years back farther. How do I account for that? Because this is a progressive thing. And so if I didn't buy that bull and I had accepted something lower, then 4 years down the road, I'm starting at a lower place again. How do I account for?
Yeah, I think, and step in if I interpret something wrong, that the concern is, in example, if you bought bull B because he was of better value that day, then the next year you want to buy, or the next time you buy a bull, you want to buy something better than bull B so you keep moving forward, right? That's kind of the point.
I think he was thinking about retaining heifers from that bull.
Oh, so if you retain heifers from bull B, yeah. But that's, yeah, good question. That's taken into account here in the index. So in this particular example, this index, and I didn't explain it, makes the assumption that heifers are being retained. And so traits like heifer pregnancy, reproductive longevity are built into that index. And as a consequence, this profit difference I showed you takes that into account. So still, if bull B sells, or whatever, if bull A sells for more than $3,000 more than bull B, you're better off economically to have taken, quote unquote, the less desirable one. Yeah. Even though his offspring won't be as good, it was still the better business decision. And that's probably a hard pill for people to swallow, right? You don't want to go spend money on something that's not as good, right? But I would contend that in probably all other aspects of business for ranchers, that's exactly the thought process they go through. Whether it's a truck they buy, a tractor they buy, whatever it is.
Paul, you feel comfortable with that? Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, that was very helpful. Thank you. I understand better now what is all in there. So.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. So a project I mentioned here, that a tool we're calling iGenDec, again, in collaboration with colleagues at the U.S. Meat Animal Research Center, Kansas State, and a company called Theta Solutions, is meant to be a web-based decision support tool to aid producers in this sire selection process. Because the reality is it can be cumbersome and confusing. There are numerous EPD, numerous breeds. Obviously, there's an impact of heterosis and there's breed difference, et cetera. And so there's a lot of partial solutions that need to be combined to actually make a decision. And so that's what iGenDec is designed to do. And this just shows you the web interface. I won't go into a lot of detail. That's not really the point of this, but the outcomes of iGenDec are a listing of candidate sires and their associated economic index values conditioned on the user's input. So the user has the opportunity to input things such as, you know, what's their annual cow cost? What are their average sale weights if they retain ownership? What are the average carcass parameters? What's the age distribution of their cow herd? How long is their planning horizon? Things of that nature. And they can use default values if they don't have some of those pieces. But what it does is it allows producers then to rank bulls based on how the bull best meets their objectives. And as a consequence, see the differences in net profit between bulls for their operation. I put down here, a bit tongue-in-cheek, it requires users to be profit motivated, and it most certainly does. If you just want to go pick the most expensive, prettiest rascal, then this tool is not for you. Right now, we're testing. This is funded by a USDA grant. We've actually got an alpha version of the software that's being tested by our advisory board right now, with plans to roll it out a bit broader to a larger testing group early in 2021.
So one question, sorry, on the EPDs and heterosis that you are mentioning on the first point. So what information will the customer get? The heterosis contribution on a particular trade or for a particular mating?
No, really good question. So the way we were able to get at heterosis from this tool, iGenDec, is that the user will identify what breed or breeds of bulls they're interested in, and the user will also identify what the general breed makeup is of their cow herd. From those two pieces of information, then, we can assign heterosis. So the user doesn't have to know what is the actual estimate of heterosis for weaning weight, in example, right? We know what that estimate is. We just need to know what breeds you plan on crossing.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions about this tool? I'm happy to answer them.
So for instance, I assume also that if a bull is registered on different associations, then the EPD that the customer gets or the user of the interface is going to be like weighted across the different sources in some way?
No, that's a good question. So there are two ways to actually get a list of candidate bulls into the system. One is that a user is actually able to upload them, right? So if I have a list of bulls and I have their EPDs, right, I can upload it to the system. The other is for participating organizations, you can think of it as a breed association. They can actually, through a secure API or programming interface, give us access to their database, whereby we can actually extract the EPDs from there. So as a consequence, if a user's doing either one of those, then I don't think there's necessarily a problem with the origin of the EPD.
Okay.
But you're most certainly right, though. It is possible out there in industry right now for a bull to have EPD from multiple genetic evaluation systems, which does make it confusing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, to summarize perhaps the more formal part of this, I just can't overstate how important it is to have a plan. If you show up to a bull sale thinking, I'll see how this goes and I'll buy a good bull, it's a failed investment from the start, right? You have to have a plan. And particularly if you retain replacement females, that can be a lengthy planning horizon. So you need to think long term and correctly identify the traits that are economically relevant and what your current production levels are. That tells you not only what traits to focus on, but which ones perhaps deserve some more emphasis. Think of bull buying as an investment and expect a return on that investment. Please don't mistake this for me saying go out and buy the cheapest bull you can. That's not at all what I'm saying, but I am saying think about the value you're getting for that investment. Use EPD and economic selection indices, and my goodness, I've said that since I started in this job some 12 years ago, and people long before me have said the same thing, yet a lot of people fail to do that. And I don't understand why we overthink that so much. The science does work, and really that's beyond contestation. Do your homework and know breed averages, or ask the seed stock vendor for them, right? So is a plus 40 EPD for weaning weight good or bad? Well, I don't know. It depends on what breed it is and what the average for that breed is, right? So have some idea. And again, if you don't know, ask. And don't be fooled by a good-looking bull with poor genetic value, all right? Buy bulls based off of genetic value. And I understand concerns with structural correctness and obviously docility, right? Bulls have to pass some minimal threshold for those things. After that, I don't see the logic at all in strictly looking at the bull's phenotype. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions about anything beef cattle genetics related. I'd point you to a few helpful sites. Obviously, our UNL beef cattle production website. The latter two are beef cattle genetics centric, the National Beef Cattle Evaluation Consortium website, and then ebeef.org. These two contain fact sheets, training manuals, and recorded webinars on all things related to beef cattle.